Okay, thank you very much on that. Another issue that, if you don't mind addressing, is school readiness. I know you worked with a large research project in school readiness.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about assessment of 4- and 5-year-olds for school readiness, and what kind of things that you look for and what would be helpful for teachers to really be paying attention to?
Yeah, well, one of the most critical elements, and the one that I worked on specifically, was early literacy skills. There's a number of things that point to whether or not a child is ready to learn to read in kindergarten. So in that 4-year-old age range, there's certain skills like general print awareness. Do they recognize particular letters? Are they starting to understand that letters have sounds that go with them? Are they, beginning to, understand rhyming words and those kinds of things? All of those general early reading skills. Not are they reading or do they know every letter in the alphabet, but are they moving in that direction? Are they starting to understand that letters go with words that go with meaning, and that those things have sounds that are critical for them to understand the whole word?
I think one of the difficult things that many teachers experience is the developmental differences in children, and when do we need to raise a red flag? So if you could you talk to us a little bit about the importance of early recognition of difficulties?
Yeah.
So often in the past, teachers have said, just wait, and then we find out that, okay, we've waited and now the child is really behind.
Yeah.
So can you give us some counsel on how to make those types of calls?
Right. I think the reason that people want to wait or just sort of see if things self-resolve over time is that they're reluctant to, first of all, have that difficult conversation with parents. It's not fun to say to a parent, listen, I think there's something not quite right about your child's development. Let's explore this further. That is not a fun position to be in. And I also think that teachers, I think that a lot of times teachers probably don't want a child to be labeled unnecessarily. They're concerned for the welfare of the child in sort of a particular kind of way where they don't want them to be labeled. And so I think once you recognize the reasons why you'd be reluctant, but then also compare it to the reasons why it's better to possibly have a child evaluated and have the proper diagnoses, which is they get intervention earlier. And almost all disorders that pop up in childhood, so from autism spectrum to learning problems to behavior problems to emotional difficulties, have better outcomes long term if you can intervene early. And so the earlier the better is actually the mantra, instead of let's wait it out and see. The earlier the better.
Okay,
Yeah.
very, very helpful advice there. Are there any particular disorders that you wish were people were more on the lookout for? And also, could you talk about, do you see many misdiagnoses these days? Are there any things that you can give us some advice about not jumping the gun too quickly on?
Wow, yeah, that's a good question. Misdiagnoses and overdiagnoses. Well, I think that one way early childhood educators can really be helpful in this process for a kind of cluster of disorders that are sometimes missed until children are a little older, is with autism spectrum disorders, for example. Autism spectrum disorders have hallmark features of disordered communication, so language issues, but not always, that children aren't talking, but that they have communication problems. So they have a hard time sort of talking like the other kids in the class. They use kind of odd phrasing, or they put words together in an odd way, or they have a hard time kind of getting across their message. And the other thing that autistic children share is that they struggle socially. And teachers are often the ones who would notice that the most. I mean, if you have a child who's sort of an only child in a family with parents who maybe didn't have a lot of exposure to young children, they didn't babysit, or they don't have nieces and nephews or that kind of thing, they're not going to really know if their child is progressing socially as they should. And so I think teachers really, really can play a critical role there in identifying children who are struggling socially. That's probably the biggest one.
And what type of when you say struggling socially, what type of behaviors would an educator notice for a child on the autism spectrum disorder?
Right, so it's sort of relative to the other same age, same gender children in the class. Are they more or less involved with their peers? So more would look like, you know, they fawn over their peers, they're too touchy, they don't seem to understand the boundaries that other kids have. You know, all kids sort of go in and out of close and separate contact with their peers, but some children are just sort of overly glommed onto their peers, and that can signal sort of a problem processing appropriate boundaries. Also, a lot of children who have autism spectrum disorders prefer to play by themselves almost all the time. And so that's another, it's sort of looking out for extremes in social interaction. Aggression is another issue. Do they hit, kick, punch, bite, or yell at their peers more than, and this is critical because all kids do some of that to a certain extent. That's part of learning how to be with your peers. But do they do that more than the other same age, same gender children in the classroom? Yeah.
And again, the other end of that question that was kind of long and complicated is misdiagnoses. Are there particular disorders that tend to be very complex in diagnosing?
Yeah, I think, well, so the autism spectrum disorders are sort of top at my list on that.
And they're on the rise too, aren't they?
They are, yeah. The statistics indicate that more and more children are being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders. You know, that actually also comes with sort of the other end of the spectrum, which is misdiagnosed. So I think a lot of children are also misdiagnosed with something on the autism spectrum when it's actually something else. That's actually not really the teacher's concern. All they can do is hope that the child gets to the appropriate professional and you know, is correctly evaluated and diagnosed.
And would you recommend that teachers counsel the parents to talk to the pediatrician first, or if they're pretty sure there's something that's going on with the child developmentally, would it be better to recommend that they seek some sort of evaluation from a psychologist? What's the first step?
Yeah, the first step, I think a good general rule is the pediatrician portal, you know, because pediatricians are used to sort of referring children for evaluations to a number of the different folks in town who can do that. You know, some of it depends on if parents have insurance or if they're paying out of pocket or if they need services for free. So, but the pediatricians usually have kind of the line, the direct line to all of those different kinds of services. So that's a good bet. If, you know, if they're really sure and the parents are ready to go forward and they don't feel like they need to go through the pediatrician, then there are private psychologists in the community. There are places like Hope Haven Children's Clinic, Nemours. There's a lot of different entities who will do this kind of work with families.
Okay, I think you have really shared some wonderful advice with our future teachers, and I thank you so much. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for us?
No, I mean, I think I just sort of a feeling of preemptive gratitude towards teachers who are willing to give their input and work with psychologists and evaluators and therapists who are working with families, realizing that they're part of a team that's, you know, put into place to really help children make the most of all of their gifts and talents.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course.
And again, this was Dr. Carla Repper.